Superintendent's report. Dr. O'Donnell.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. As we prepared for this evening, we prioritized an update regarding the Siemens property sale. We have a lot of information available on our website, DASD.org/budget, including frequently asked questions, many of which were questions that we've heard here during board meetings, the past board meetings. For this evening, we've collaborated with Roger Huggins, our real estate solicitor from Lamb McErlane Law Firm, to create a summary of the history of the Siemens property as well as a contract overview for the board. So I'd like to welcome Roger at this time, and I know that we have the information attached to our website, and Roger's going to walk us through us at this time. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Superintendent O'Donnell. Good evening, board members. Thank you for having me this evening to give you a little bit of an update on where we've been and where we may be headed with this Siemens property. We did put together a PowerPoint, well, Jen put together a PowerPoint that I helped her with, and we'd like to just run through it tonight and give everybody a little bit of a background and history and as I said, get to where we are today and what the future may hold. As everybody knows, this property is owned by Siemens for many, many, many years. It's an industrial zone property, has been zoned industrial, I believe, since at least the 80s. The district acquired it in September of 2006. The intent at the time was to develop a third campus for the district at that site. A school was not permitted under the existing zoning at the time, and the school district was unable to get the zoning changed to permit the school. So in the ensuing years, what we saw was population growth in the southern part of the county, central area of the district, and it rendered a campus in this location no longer necessary for the district. At that point, the district decided that it should try and sell the asset, monetize it for the benefit of the district. At that point, and we are now in December of 2013, we entered into an agreement of sale with the Hankin Group. The Hankin Group is a very well-known local developer. They are the folks that did the Eagleview project in Exton. Their plan for this site was sort of a mini Eagleview, if you will. They envisioned having some commercial use in there, some retail, some residential, a very nice project that would essentially mirror what you had in Eagleview. They also needed a zoning change to permit that. After several years of discussions and trying, they came to the conclusion that the zoning change wasn't going to happen. We are now in the fall of September 2021. Again, still the district did not need the property. We were looking to monetize the asset again, and we went back out to market, looking this time to see if we could find someone who would be an industrial user of the space consistent with the existing zoning. We received a number of bids and proposals, and after a vetting process, entered into an agreement with Carvana in February of 2022. This was an agreement for about $87 million. As in all of these agreements, they come with a due diligence period at the outset, during which essentially the buyer gets the opportunity to take a look at the property, do some initial investigation, and decide whether or not they want to proceed. In this case, Carvana decided against proceeding, and they terminated the contract prior to the expiration of the due diligence period. We again went back out to market, and within a matter of months, we had a proposal from Audubon Land Development. They wanted to purchase the property, again, for an industrial use permitted under the existing zoning, and we entered into an agreement of sale with them in July of 2022. This was a contract for a little over $96 million. They paid a $2 million deposit at the outset, and we initially had a closing date as early as December of 2022. The contract did have some extensions built into it. These were options that could be exercised by Audubon. Each time they exercised an extension option, it carried with it the obligation to make additional deposits. The initial extension exercise date was November 1 of 2022. We got to that point in time. There was, I'll say, the industrial market went into a quick slump. That caused Audubon some cause for concern in terms of putting up the deposit due on November 1st of 2022. They approached the district and asked the district if the district would allow them to extend that initial closing date from December 31st, 2022 to December 31st, 2023. They did not want to put up the deposits for doing that because of what had happened in the market, but they did agree that they would continue to, excuse me, never fails. They did agree that they would continue to pursue the project, and that if for any reason they walked away from the project, the district would own all of the work product that they had generated through the date of termination. Instead of just leaving that an open window, we went back to them and said, okay, we'll consider giving you the extension without the payment. However, we want you to build into this amendment some language that would indicate that you would be pursuing some specific things over the ensuing year. And they agreed to do that. They were built into the contract. From that point on, they have been pursuing the project. And you have to understand that any development project is very, very fluid. There are any number of twists and turns that can happen, and these projects evolve, their plans evolve. It is not a bright line, cut and dry type of process. But at any rate, they have been pursuing the approvals for the project, and we are now at a point in early July of 2023 where they had as one of the milestones in their agreement conditional use approval by June 30 of this year. Obviously, that came and went. They didn't get it. And so that triggered an automatic 60-day time period under the agreement for them to secure that conditional use approval. And if they did not secure that conditional use approval, the district would have the option to examine whether or not they felt that Audubon was in default under the agreement. And if they reached that conclusion that they did feel they were in default, then they could terminate the agreement. And so that comes up at the end of August. If the district gets to that point and decides that yes, we think they are in default, then obviously they could terminate the agreement. Audubon may not agree with that decision, and if Audubon doesn't agree with that decision, it has certain remedies that are available to it under the contract, and those remedies include suing the district to get their deposit back. They could also sue the district to recover the cost that they've incurred to date. And they could also retain control of the work product, and they could also file a claim for what's called specific performance under the contract, which means that they could ask a court to direct the district to perform the contract as it's written. If the district decided not to terminate, then one of two things will happen. They would be obligated either to close by December 31st of 2023, or they could exercise an extension option, and they would have to do that by November 1st of 2023 and pay an additional deposit at that time. Now, looking at the amendment and what the obligations of the parties are, the obligation of Audubon under the agreement is to diligently pursue the project using their best efforts going forward. There are also some obligations on the part of the district. The district is obligated to cooperate with them. They are obligated not to oppose them, not to undermine them. What shape or form that might take would depend upon the behavior involved, but it could be such things as entertaining alternative uses for the property that are inconsistent with an agreement that they are bound by. But we're there at this point. Going forward, there are additional milestones that hit at the end of this year. You can see there's land development approval, zoning hearing board variances and approvals. We don't know what those are actually going to be, just like we don't know what conditional use approval would look like, because there isn't a plan that has been submitted yet. Audubon is working, and you'll see a little bit later, on alternative plans that could alter the types of conditional use approvals that are necessary. It would alter what variances may or may not be necessary. I'm sure they will do their best to eliminate the need for those. But if they get to those milestones, the process starts again. There's a 60-day window. You look at it again. You decide whether or not you think that they have been diligently pursuing as they're obligated to do. You decide whether or not you think that you should hold them in default or not hold them in default. The closing dates extend, and all the while, they continue to make significant deposit payments to the district that are non-refundable, I should note, unless there's a default on the part of the district along the way. So that gets us into 2024, and they hit another milestone date in the summer of 2024. And again, this all assumes that they've been extending and they've been making their deposits all along the way. And in the summer of 2024, their last milestones that are in the agreement are some state and national approvals, DEP, the MPDES approval, which is an environmental approval that originates with the federal government but is generally administered through the state. Those are next summer. Again, if they miss those, cure periods start again. The district can look at it again and see whether or not they have been diligently pursuing these things and decide whether or not they want to hold Audubon in default. And if they do that, you have the same analysis over again as to whether they have been diligent or not been diligent. They may agree or not agree. If they don't agree, they still have their same set of remedies that they have at each time this this comes up along the way. And then finally, December 31st, 2024 is the outside date for closing. And so if things end at that date, they will close or they will be in default. And if they are in default at that point in time and they've been making their payments, I think the total deposits will be somewhere in the neighborhood of $9 million or so. If they don't close. Now, as we sit here today, one of the things before us is what have they been doing, and do we feel as if they have been diligently pursuing this project? Audubon's reported to me that they have generated all of the studies that you see up there, conditional traffic use study, sound study, wetlands and watercourses, environmental, their bog turtle study. They've gotten clearance from U.S. Fish and Wildlife on that. Viewscapes, buffering, grading. They've done an analysis of the fiscal impact. Butterfly habitat, bee migration. Actually, those last two, nobody needs those, but they got some feedback that there were some concern about those two things, and so they went out and conducted studies on them anyway. Conceptual stormwater, and as I mentioned before, they've developed some alternative conceptual layouts for the project as well. So far, they've met with the owners of Milky Way Farm, an adjacent office building owner. That's the building that I think is when you come off Route 100 heading towards Lineville Station Road, that building that's right there next to the turnpike. The property owner adjacent to Haywood Drive, this is a commercial developer who owns a parcel of land that separates this tract from Haywood Drive. So the Audubon has spoken to the owner of that parcel. And they've also spoken with the Lionville Youth Association. Part of this project involves the construction of, I think it's 20-some acres of land that's going to be dedicated to playing fields and recreational use. And so they've been in touch with the Youth Association over that. So, looking at all of that, and as I mentioned, their obligation to diligently pursue the performance milestones and this project, have they, in my view, done that? We might touch first for a minute on what does diligently pursue mean. There is no bright line. You can't say that if you've done 1, 2, or 3 things, you've satisfied it. If you've done 2, but you haven't done 3 or 4, you haven't satisfied it. We do know the opposite ends. We know that if they've just sat on their hands and done nothing, then they haven't. We also know that if they have gone overboard and just have done everything imaginable, pretty hard to say that they have not. In this case, we have a pretty good list of things that they've done. And I think that when you look at defining diligently pursue, and you look at the industry standard associated with that, and that gets established by having another developer who comes in, testifies that they are familiar with the process, they have worked in this area, they are experienced, and they will give you their opinion. And they will say, we think that they have diligently pursued this and have met the industry standard for that. In my view, standing here today, I believe that any fact finder that looks at this would come to the conclusion that so far Audubon's been doing a pretty good job and that they have been diligently pursuing their obligations. As I mentioned before, that's my opinion. There are people that could differ. It's a decision that the board at the appropriate time would make. This, I do not believe is it, but if the board makes that decision, as we discussed, Audubon may not agree, and if Audubon does not agree, it has remedies available to it, which I mentioned, that it could pursue, should it wish to do so. So, with that, any questions?
I just have a question. So, back in July, when they asked for an extension, they submitted a sketch plan and an A4 size paper. Do you know the progress on? So, in July last year, when they asked for an extension, they submitted a sketch plan on an A4 size paper, which apparently they submitted to the township. Do we know where they are in regards to that sketch plan?
I know that they did prepare a sketch plan, which they showed to us at the time. And one of their first obligations was to go to the Planning Commission and submit that Planning Commission. That's an informal event. It is not a formal application for approval or anything like that. They got feedback from the township. They, in addition to that, along the way, as you can see, they've done their own studies, they've spoken to people, and they've developed 4 or 5 alternative plans that they're working on now. I obviously can't speak for them. I can tell you what they've reported to me, and that is simply that based on the feedback that they got, they developed these alternative plans. But there was never a formal, quote, application that required any sort of action approving or not approving on the part of the township.
And just for my understanding, could you please just tell me once again, right now we're in the 60-day cure period, so the buyer is going to come back to us end of August with what kind of a request?
I don't know. I can't speak for Audubon. I don't represent them, and I'm not privy to any of that.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm just curious. I just wanted to get an understanding of where the milestones came from and how they ended up as part of the contract.
The milestones came from the district side. Typically, you would see these types of provisions inserted into a contract by the developer. They would appear as contingencies in the agreement of sale that the developer would pursue because the developer does not want to get too far at risk with their investment into the project unless they know they can build it. And so it's very, very common for any one of these development contracts, and we know because we've been through several of them here, not only with this property but with other properties that the districts own that we have sold. But they're typically on the developer side, so that if the developer has a problem, with the township or getting their entitlements to build what they want to build, they can exercise their option to terminate the contract based upon the contingency and get some or all of their deposit back. Here, we didn't have that. We stayed away from any contingencies on the part of the developer based upon their approvals. The obligations that they have to close are simply based on watching the calendar. We entered into the contract. They had to make a deposit. They had to close by a certain date. If they had the ability to extend that closing date, not because they wanted approvals or needed to get A, B, or C, but they just wanted to extend the closing date. In order to do that, they have to pay additional deposit dollars. But the approvals are not a contingency that the developer wanted. We put them in because the developer wanted additional time and they wanted to miss those first couple of deposit payments. And they promised us and agreed that they would continue to pursue the approvals for the project, and that if they decided to terminate, which was their right, we would own all of that work product, and that work product would add value for the district with the next buyer who came along. All of these studies that you saw that they've done, they weren't obligated to do those. They've done them on their own. They are all part of the development process, but we wanted to have something in the agreement that would push them towards doing that and spending that money, which is very significant, the dollars that they put into this, so that in exchange for the additional time we were giving them, if they didn't see it through, we would have something, hopefully of value, for the district.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up, if we had wanted to put a hard and fast, dead stop date or requirement in there, what kind of language would it have said instead of that diligently pursue?
Well, they would have been fixed dates, just like the closing date, just like the deposit dates. They would have simply been fixed dates. Developers will never agree to those, though, because developers can't speak for townships and authorities that are issuing approvals. They never know how that's going to go. And so you would get to that point, you would have it in there, and the developer would just say to you, I can't meet this. The township, I've got this issue, I've got that issue, can't be met, I need some more time, or I'm just going to walk.
So that flexibility is part of that industry standard that you spoke of?
Sure, it's very common.
Thank you.
Okay, so am I correct in believing that even if Audubon does not acquire their conditional use, as long as they're making progress towards and making their payments, they could still choose to close?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I just wanted to kind of go back, to the beginning and reiterate, when we purchased the property, when the district purchased the property in 2006, it was zoned at that time the same industrial use zoning that remains today, correct? So we purchased it with the hopes that we would be able to get that use changed to residential, which is what would be required to allow a school. Is that correct?
In fact, you weren't the first to try. Before the district bought it, my understanding is that I think there were at least two major residential developers that wanted to get that zoning change to put residential subdivision in there, and they were turned down.
Right. So from a zoning standpoint, I mean, there's been literal decades of history with the township that changing the zoning from industrial use to residential use has not occurred historically, has not been successful, historically. So to see this property as some other use other than the industrial use, it's been tried multiple times historically, including, other transactions that we've tried to make on behalf of the district has tried to sell to other developers for residential use. So I feel like that's some, misinformation that's floating around that why don't we just, why doesn't the district sell it to make houses? Residential properties provide income to the district. That's a more acceptable use, by some. But I think it's important to reiterate that that's been tried in the past, and the zoning has not changed since at least 2006 to today, when the district has owned the property.
That's true, and in fact, the township's always viewed this as an industrial site. That they've concluded that this is the use that they want, and they have very recently reiterated that when they redrew their township comprehensive plan, where they once again designated this as an industrial site and land that they wanted to see developed as industrial as the use.
Okay, thank you.
One last question. It's come up several times about the cure period. And if I am understanding it correctly, it's really just a check-in point during the contract to see if the milestones have been met.
It gives you, it gives you I guess I'll say tripwire for a better word, or for lack of a better word, that you revisit and you take a look and you see what they've been doing, and you decide whether or not you believe that they have been fulfilling their obligation to pursue these approvals, and the amendment gives you the specific option following the expiration of that cure period to say, we don't think you have, and we're going to terminate.
Thank you.
And this is a big if. If the agreement of sale was terminated and Audubon did sue us, would we at that time be able to consider alternative uses for the land, or would it be stopped also because of court proceedings?
That would depend on what type of claim they made. If they simply pursued a claim for the return of the deposit, the recovery of their expenses, and retention of the work product, then the agreement would be terminated. If, on the other hand, they've asserted a claim for specific performance to have the court direct the district to complete the sale, the property is going to be encumbered until the conclusion of that litigation, and you couldn't do anything with it.
Do you know how long typical litigation like that lasts?
It's at least a year or two.
Thank you.
If I may, the office building that is adjacent to the land that abuts along the turnpike, where did they purchase that land from?
I don't know the answer to that.
And how long has it been there? Do you know? I don't know.
Been there for a long time.
Okay.
I think it's been there for at least 20, 30 years.
Would it be, could it be assumed that that was also zoned the same, since it's so, the proximity is, or?
No, you can't make that assumption.
Okay.
Because those lines are pretty sharp. In fact, this property, there's one little piece of this property that has a different zoning.
Thank you.
No more questions? Thank you for coming out and talking us through that. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.